In this video, I'm going to tell you the creative ways to secure development deals. Most people think that development deals are bought, but they're totally wrong. In reality, they're structured. I'm going to go through the different ways that you can structure development deals, as well as some of the ways that I've personally structured development deals. Money is just one lever. There are plenty of other levers and tools and opportunities to negotiate when it comes to doing a development deal. And I'm going to give you a full breakdown of all of those areas. What's most important is certainty, speed, and problem solving, not just for you, but for the seller. That seller is going to want some kind of certainty over who's doing the deal, when are you going to do the deal by, what your track record is, can you get the deal over the line, and ultimately, are they going to get the amount of money that you say you're going to give them by the date that by the date you say you're going to give it to them. So let's be real. Most of the deals that I've done, the development deals that I've done, have been bought, or a lot of the deals have been bought in some kind of subject to planning capacity. So I use an option agreement mostly. This option agreement is an exclusive agreement, so it's a document created by a lawyer and both parties have lawyers representing each side. This document gives you an option to buy a plot, real estate, whatever it is, the real estate deal you're doing. Gives you an opportunity to buy that. So you write a contract up, it's an option agreement. You pay a fee to the seller for them giving you the right, the option, an option contract. Within that option contract, it's going to stipulate how much you're paying for the option contract itself, how much you're paying for the end deal, and then how much you're going to pay to get it over the line once the deal's done, how much you're going to pay for the actual site once it's done. So that option agreement lists all of that. Look, by the way, if you want a copy of an option agreement, if you want the very option agreement that I use on my deals, that I've used successfully dozens of times to secure hundreds of millions of pounds worth of deals, then see the link in this video, link in bio. It's everywhere. If you go to my store online, you can buy an option agreement template and you'll save yourself thousands. I've been quoted as high as £15,000 from lawyers to secure option agreements, and as little as £3,000. So you can use my template and then get it backed up and reviewed by your lawyer once you've used my template before you get it signed. But that method will save you thousands of pounds. So feel free to have that template. I've used that to structure my deals as a big tool. It's reduced the amount of money I've required on day one. I haven't needed millions of pounds in day one to buy certain sites or hundreds of thousands of pounds. But it does allow me time. It allows me time to go and get planning permission, or time to get the financing in place if I require financing, time to get the relevant permissions or licenses agreed before I commit to before I physically have to buy the site. I can commit to the deal and I can have, more importantly, the seller commit, because there's a lot of time and resources obviously required to do these deals. And so you need a buy-in, you need commitment, proper, solid commitment from the seller to tie them into the deal. And this is how it's done. Obviously, before you get into option agreements, one of the most straightforward ways is just to do a straight purchase. So you find a property that you like, you say to the seller, I'm going to pay you £500,000. They agree, £500,000. You go for solicitors, you transfer the cash from your account to your solicitor's account, and your solicitor sends it to their solicitor's account. Deal's done. Sign contracts, happy days. You could get that done within a few weeks from the UK. Maybe a bit quicker if you're lucky. If your team's really good, you could do it quicker, maybe in a couple of weeks. That's it. That's pretty straightforward. Usually you're taking pretty much all of the risk. And then if it requires planning permission, for instance, you'd go off and get planning. So you're going to pay, obviously, sums in addition to the £500,000 you spent. And then it's all at risk, right? The £500,000 plus the funds that you use to, let's say, perhaps pay for planning permission. My case with the option agreement is I'm not paying the £500,000 on day one. I could be paying as little as £1 for the option agreement. And the planning permission and the permits and everything else I need to do, I'll pay for that separately, which I would have to pay for anyway if I bought the site. But I do that without buying the site first, make sure everything's fine, it gets approved, it's done in a way that I need it, and then I have the option to buy the property later on at a date because of the option agreement. So you de-risk your position. If it turns out you don't get the permissions that you need, you can walk away. That's what an option agreement allows you to do. And if it turns out you do get it, then you can buy the property, and at that point you've only risked, let's say it cost you £100,000 in fees to sort everything else out, and you've only risked £100,000 instead of £600,000 if you had to buy the site as well. So this is why it's a critical, absolutely critical tool as a developer, is an option agreement. I actually met a developer once. It's a friend. I say met, it's a friend. We're having a conversation once, and I couldn't believe when she said she'd rather buy the site than have an option agreement. And one of the first times I've heard that. She obviously has a lot of cash, but why you'd want to tie yourself down to buying a site, I'm not sure. Depends on what type it is. I've bought sites without option agreements and bought them straight, but they're usually income producing assets already. Car park, it's an office building, it's an industrial unit. There's usually something there to allow me to have some kind of downside protection. So if it doesn't work out, at least I can rent it out. Some kind of opportunity there. Usually, that's how we do it. But when you're buying, so even on a straight purchase, you can put up your own money or investor money. So you can raise money from other investors, people you know, friends and family, or smart, sophisticated investors that can loan you funds or invest with you in the deal, and then you can use those funds to then buy the property. You can also do that in combination with bridging finance, which is short-term lending, or you could do it in terms of bank financing, which could be development financing, where they're funding you to take on the development risk, the development work, as well as the acquisition of the site. Usually to get development financing, you need planning permission in place, usually, because they want you to be able to get on the development straight away. If you don't have planning already, then you're likely to have to go down the bridging route if you're getting external loan funding. And then that bridging route allows you to get planning permission. And then from there, you can then switch it to the development financing where you're doing significant works, and they'll help fund you on your development works on the site. So that's how it works in terms of the acquisition, funding the acquisition, and potential financing options, and an option agreement. Promotion agreements are interesting. Promotion agreements are whereby you have an agreement with the owner of a property, and this agreement stipulates that you and the owner are going to enter into this, effectively a partnership, and you and the owner, or the owner, will pay for the fees relating to the planning permission, depending on whatever deal you agree. Usually it's the person that's striking the deal paying for the fees to get whatever consent's required. And then you have a profit split at the end. So let's say you come across a 10-acre site in a rural area, and you think this 10-acre site has great potential for self-storage. You think there's a big opportunity to do self-storage or some kind of major warehouse distribution center. You go to the landowner and you say, look, seen your site here, you've got 10 acres. I'd like to buy it from you, but there's a way you can make a lot more money if you can work with me on this deal. Instead of me paying you £1 million now, if we can work together and we can get this permission for this big distribution center, that site is now worth 5 million. And so can we agree a deal whereby anything beyond the 1 million, so anything between 1 million and 5 million, which we're able to sell it for later on, we agree a split. So that split could be whatever you agree. It could be 50-50, it could be 80-20 to the landowner, 20% to the land promoter. It could be you get your £1 million back for the land because that's what it was worth on day one. The land promoter gets all their costs out first, and then you do a profit split at a percentage to be agreed. This is a good way because it allows you to get into it without having to put money up to buy the site. It allows you to work collaboratively with the landowner to get a deal done. And it means you can do a lot of deals. Planning permission or something like that could be expensive. Some organizations can take 10, 20, 30 years to get planning permission, especially on big sites, especially on, when it's a huge potential new village or housing site, and it could be 15-year planning application and millions of pounds worth of input and effort. It could take a long time. That kind of input and investment is required over time. And to put that kind of money in and resource in, you have to be very pro planning and have a lot of trust and faith in the process, and have a bit of a tolerance for risk, because there's a good chance you may not get planning permission. So if you don't have to buy the site as well, it's a great way to do it. But that strategy, that promotion agreement, usually works well for farms, churches, someone with really big land holdings. Usually that happens when they've got huge land holdings, and let's say they're not going to want to sell anyway. So sometimes you go to these farmers and they've got 50 acres, and you say to them, if you were going to buy those 50 acres today, those 50 acres are probably worth, you might find it's worth £10,000 an acre. And so £10,000 an acre over 50 acres is gone blank, £500,000. So that £500,000 for that site could be a waste of money for someone coming in. You've got 50 acres, £10,000 an acre. What are you going to do with a 50-acre site? There's nothing you can do with it anyway. Why would you want to spend the £500,000 on it in that time? But a promotion agreement, you may say, actually, I'd rather put £500,000 into the planning application and then partner with the landowner. And that may work for the landowner as well, because some of them may not want to sell for £500,000 anyway. But if you say to them, actually, if we do a deal, you can end up with 5 million, that changes everything, right? That's generational type money that they can pass through generations, so it makes a big difference to them. Really align incentives with the landowner. Joint ventures is another way you can get really creative with these deals. You don't have to go out again on an option agreement, promotion agreement, or buying it straight away. You could do a joint venture with the landowner whereby they put the land into the deal, you fund the development costs and the work, and then you build it together, and then you sell it, and then you split proceeds. That's another way to do a joint venture with a landowner. To be honest, I've never been a huge fan of joint ventures of landowners, just because the expectations are usually off. The landowner clearly wants a lot of money, and they're going to want sometimes a lot of involvement in the deal. Something I've never really been keen with. I wanted to always work with people that I knew were very commercially minded in business. And not all landowners are like that. Some of them have inherited it. Some of them bought it for an alternative purpose, like farming, and are not really business minded. I just never really wanted to get myself into a pickle with some of these landowners. But it can work. Plenty of people have done great joint ventures of landowners. They contribute the land, you contribute the financing. You agree what that land value is on day one. So let's say today it's worth £1 million, and with your development you think you can make £5 million profit. You're going to say to them, right, once this development's done, you're going to get your £1 million back first, because that's what it was worth when we did the deal. And then you're going to have an agreement to split the rest. It might be all costs taken away, the £1 million taken away for the original land, any cost that were accrued to do the deal, and then you do a profit split at the end. So that joint venture agreement can actually work quite well if you find the right type of person to do a deal with, and you want to make sure you've got control of that deal. It's got to be structured in the right way. You have to, on all these deals, please, please, please do not make the mistake of thinking you can use ChatGPT to come up with some kind of basic agreement. Make sure you're using lawyers to help you draft some of these agreements. Make sure it's an experienced lawyer that's done those kind of agreements before. But obviously you're adding a lot of weight to the table. You're going to offer the deliverability of the scheme. You're going to potentially help with funding the scheme. You can help with overall direction and expertise to help structure a deal with the landowner. And then you can go from there. It works quite well, especially when the owner is asset rich and cash poor. To be fair, there was a guy that I was looking at doing a deal with not too long ago, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. He was actually a very successful businessman. He sold his business for a lot of money, and he still had this really big factory premises in the middle of a city centre that I want to do a deal on. Great site. Ran the numbers and offered him an opportunity for me to do it on an option agreement. He wasn't interested. I then offered a joint venture where I offered a similar deal. It's valued at this on day one. This is what you need, and this is what you think it's valued at. I was comfortable with his valuation. I said anything beyond that, we're going to split. He agreed to fund the cost of the planning as well, and I agreed to do all the work. So he said, fine, he'll value his land at this. He'll cover the cost of the planning and he'll get that back first. And we agreed what the profit split would be beyond a certain number. And I think it was like 50-50, that all costs back plus 50-50, and I do all the work. He was happy with that. A lot of money, very successful. He knew he was going to get at least what the property was worth plus his money back, so everyone was happy. Unfortunately, the deal didn't quite work out in terms of numbers, so deal's still there now. Because the viability was off and we ran the numbers, the opportunity just wasn't there to pay him what he needed. So that was a shame, but they're more than possible. You can even strike deals where, like I said, they will fund the deal if you have the right partner. And other deals whereby you need to fund it and they'll just sit back and let you do the work. So there are other ways to do it, but that guy's very commercial and I liked him. We'd met each other a few times, been to his house. So it's a bit more familiar territory. He'd been to my sites. I'd met him over a few years. His site was near one of my sites, so we had a bit of a working relationship and knowledge of each other. Enough for him to understand, actually, I think you can take this on. And that's what credibility and track record does over time. That's another way you can do it. Another way to get creative is a subject to planning deal. So this is where you have it's basically a conditional deal. You go to the seller. So this is different from an option agreement. A subject to planning deal usually binds you to the deal. So you having a deal with a seller and you say, right, I've seen your site. I want to do a deal. I need to get planning first. I'm going to sign a contract with you that says, here's my 5-10% deposit on day one for the site. We're going to enter into this deal, conditional exchange, get ready. I'm going to try and get planning permission. If I get planning permission, I have to buy your site. And that's a subject to planning deal. So on the basis I get the planning, I have to buy your site. Not like an option agreement where you could potentially get planning or get planning for something that doesn't quite work and then walk away. This one, you're obligated to buy. That's quite an interesting deal. This is done a lot as well, subject to planning. And I've actually never done a subject to planning. I've done mostly the other deal types, but I've not actually done a subject to planning because I've always pushed to have the option agreement where I can protect my downside and walk away. There's no additional risk to the seller in that response, in that regard. But some sellers want certainty, right? If they've worked with you and waited for you to do a deal, someone's going to want you to make sure you commit to buying the deal once it's done. But it could also work in a seller's favour. The price that you've agreed to buy it at, if you walked away, maybe they'd be able to get more money elsewhere, and there's plenty of sellers that have been able to get that agreed. But again, that reduces the risk for you. You don't have to buy the site first. You get to risk planning money and professional expenses that you would have had to incur anyway if you bought the site. So it's a very smart way and creative way to structure a deal. Another way is delayed completion and deferred consideration. So you're committing to the deal, but you're deferring how long you're delaying the completion. So you'll exchange early on. So you'll pay a 10% deposit. This is your initial contract to say you're definitely buying the property. But instead of coming up with the rest of the funds, let's say it's £1 million purchase and you pay a 10% deposit, you're going to pay £100,000 on day one. The £900,000 balance, you've agreed to defer it, which we call an exchange of delayed completion. That I've done a bunch of times. And so you could do that on day one if they definitely want a deal done. And you can say, well, give me 18 months to buy it, and then you delay completion for that long so they don't get the rest of the funds, or the sale doesn't officially go through until you come up with the rest of the funds. That's a very creative way to do a deal. I know it's a mechanism I've used to buy myself some time to get financing in place or planning in place or whatever else that crops up. It gives me a window to do stuff, so that's a really good way to do deals. I definitely recommend that. You could also delay the money they get. So let's say, for instance, you do the deal and you've bought the property for them outright. You may defer some consideration. So let's say you agree to buy it for £1 million. You may have done a deal where the deal goes through, you pay them £750,000 on day one, and then you have an agreement to defer some of that consideration, the £250,000, until a later date. And it may be, for instance, 6 months after you complete a development. You may say, once I've finished this development, I will pay you 6 months after that, the balance. So there's other ways you can do it. Seller financing is actually a really good way to do a deal. This especially works well on distressed deals. Seller financing is usually where you actually basically get a deal with the seller. So for instance, let's say you agree to buy the site for £1 million. You may say to the seller, you don't have a mortgage. I'm not really in a position or interested in buying a site right now up front. Allow me to pay you £100,000 a year over the next 10 years and do a deal from you that way. They may agree to it. Or you may do a deal where you say, allow me to pay you £100,000 a year for the next 2 years, and then I'll pay you the balance after year 2. That's another way to do it, and that's called seller financing, where you're basically getting a mortgage or some kind of consideration payment plan with the seller. It's a really cool way to do it. Something to think about. It works especially well with distressed sales, family or legacy assets. Can also obviously work well in business and property. It's a big strategy that's used in M&A right now, where small business owners are basically selling the business to someone, and then that amount they sold the business for is loaned to the seller. Sorry, it's loaned to the buyer. So the seller grants a loan to the buyer, and then the buyer then has to pay down that loan, the amount they paid for the business, back to the seller over time. And obviously if they default on payments, they get the property back or the business back. There's a big saying in this game, it's your price, my terms. That's a big saying across real estate, and it's a big saying across business acquisitions. Keep that in mind. If someone's stuck or set on a price, you work out terms that make their price work. Oftentimes, when you start to getting creative with their price and it doesn't work still, they can often come down in the price that they were planning to pay. So here's another way you can do a deal, is what you call a land swap or property swap and an overage. So you could do a development, and let's say you build 50 flats. You can say, well, as part of this deal, I'm going to use your land. Once the development's complete, I will give you 5 flats, and that's for you giving me the land. So you can get really creative and offer up a deal whereby you swap your land. Obviously, you need a really good legal agreement to account for that. You've got to work out the mechanism. Are they putting a land into a new company that you both own, or they have a charge over? How are you structuring that deal? You need a lawyer definitely, always, both sides need to have representation. You need a lawyer, and you need to make sure as a developer that the other party has a lawyer and they're represented. Because if that was ever to go to court, they could claim that they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. There's a risk there. So that's very important that you make sure they have representation. But again, it's a good way to not have to pay up front for the land. A very creative way to do a deal. The reason why most people never really do deals is that they've got fear, or they're not creative enough, or they're thinking about directly, how do I buy this site? It's not about how you buy it. Even here, where I am in the UAE, where I'm increasingly looking at doing deals now, still doing deals in the UK, by the way. We're looking at some stuff right now. Here, it's interesting. I get the question, what's your budget? What's your budget? That's never really a consideration in the UK in terms of what's your budget to buy a plot of land. It's never really about, for me, it's never been about budget. It's about, well, what can I build? Once I know what I can build, what it's worth, what the unit mix is, what I can rent it for or sell it for, what the exit's worth, then I can work out what the development costs are, then I can work out the profit and what I can pay for the land. That's the most important aspect. So it just depends what it is, because it could be a high risk type development deal in an area that I don't like. I'm not going to do the deal. It's not about budget. It's about the other factors that make up the development. Pardon me. If you can structure deals correctly, you will never have to compete on price again. Being a small developer works in your advantage. I've been able to win over a bunch of successful deals quickly because I've been able to move quickly, because I've got a small team. And when I started out, it was just me. It was my decision. I wasn't waiting for a board of directors to approve anything. You need to use that flexibility and that fluidity to your advantage. Be sure to use that to your advantage. So look, there's some of the creative ways that you can use to structure deals. Obviously my program, if you want more mentorship, goes into that in more detail, but there's plenty of free content that I've got out here now where you can learn more about these creative structures. All these deals need to be done with a lawyer. Make sure you've got proper representation from a lawyer and the other party has it, because you don't want to fall short. But there's no rules to this game. Usually when you're doing deals, people talk about paying a 10% deposit. Why? Why is there a 10% deposit? Who made this rule up? Why is it anything more than £1? So make sure you're creative with all aspects, question every part of the deal, risk as little as you can up front, because you're going to be taking a lot of risk elsewhere in terms of time, money, resources in trying to get the deal done. That's what you need to do, and give yourself as much time as possible as well. Ask for 18 to 24 months on option agreements. When I first started, it was 12. I quickly learned that 12 months weren't enough in some markets, and I quickly changed it to 18 to 24 months. I'd usually start at 24 and then come down to 18 and just be very straight with people and say, it's not realistic. Or at least have some mechanisms within the contract that allow you to extend. Again, you can use my option agreement, that's on my website. That's been a phenomenal document for me. I've tested it in a legal sense when I've had disputes around the agreement, and it's held me safely because there's been a restriction on their title, meaning they cannot sell without my input, but that's what the agreement allows. Hope that was helpful. Any more questions or comments, comment below, send me a message. Feel free to watch my free mini course on getting into development. Let's go. Until next time.